The Viking legend is history's greatest marketing campaign. It sold us this image of stone-faced conquerors and master seafarers, but the actual user manual for being a Viking was filled with bafflingly stupid instructions. We're talking about a legal system that was a mess of loopholes, hygiene habits you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, and a level of superstition that made rational decisions impossible. We have 32 historically proven facts that pull back the curtain on their absolute dumbest moments. 1. Just when you think Viking personal grooming can't get any weirder, archaeologists unearth skulls with intentionally filed horizontal grooves in their front teeth. No, you heard that right. Someone took a sharp tool and meticulously carved racing stripes into their incisors, like some kind of agonizing prehistoric grills trend. Why in Odin's name would they do this? Some historians guess it was to look more terrifying, maybe by filling the grooves with red pigment for a blood-soaked snarl. Others think it was just a bizarre fashion statement. But can you imagine the searing pain of filing your own teeth down without anesthetic? It's a permanent, excruciating, and profoundly dumb dental choice, all for a look that probably just made eating an apple a complete nightmare. 2. The Viking legal system had some creative loopholes, especially for murder. Now, killing someone was generally a bad move, obviously, but there was a weirdly formal distinction between a sneaky assassination and an honorable, openly declared killing. If you publicly announced, "Hey Olaf, just a heads up, I'm going to kill you later," or challenged him to a formal duel, it was still a crime, but a different class of crime. It followed a recognized, if brutal, legal procedure that could end in compensation instead of an all-out blood feud. It was a dumb legal hack for loudmouth murderers who understood that in the Viking world, even homicide had a bizarre code of etiquette you were supposed to follow. 3. Sailors are a superstitious bunch, but some Vikings took their attempts to control the weather to a new level of magical thinking. They truly believed they could summon or dismiss winds by tying and untying special wind knots in a rope. Each knot supposedly held a different wind, and untying one would release it. Whistling, on the other hand, was a huge no-no, as it was thought to whistle up a storm. Picture a longship in a terrifying North Atlantic gale, waves crashing over the sides, and the crew is frantically fumbling with a bit of string, convinced that untying the right knot will fix it. It's a profoundly dumb faith in nautical arts and crafts to solve a life-or-death crisis. 4. If you couldn't settle a dispute by shouting at your local assembly, Vikings had a much more hands-on option: the holmgang. This was a formal duel fought on a tiny designated piece of ground, often an animal hide or a small island, to make sure nobody could run away. The rules varied, but it was essentially a state-sanctioned death match to decide who owned a sheep or whose honor had been insulted. It was a brutal, incredibly risky, and very public form of conflict resolution that basically said, "We can't agree on this property line, so let's just whack each other with axes on this rug until one of us drops." Absolutely brilliant, and spectacularly dumb. 5. Forget modern fashion critics. Viking wives were the ultimate style police, and a wardrobe malfunction could literally end your marriage. A man could be legally divorced by his wife for certain clothing offenses. We're talking about wearing a shirt cut so low that it exposed too much chest hair, a clear marital deal-breaker. Wearing trousers in a color deemed too effeminate, like a flashy red, could also get you served with divorce papers. Some sagas even hint that an insufficiently hairy chest could be grounds for your wife to kick you out. Imagine your entire marriage collapsing not over infidelity, but because your tunic was a bit too revealing, or you had a thing for scarlet trousers. 6. The Viking justice system sometimes outsourced its decisions to God, or more accurately, to dumb luck and a high pain tolerance. This was called trial by ordeal. Accused of a crime? Simple. Just grab this red-hot iron bar and carry it for 10 paces, or maybe plunge your arm into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a stone. The decider wasn't the act itself, but what happened after. If your hand healed nicely within a few days, without turning into a disgusting, gangrenous mess, then congratulations, you were officially innocent. It was a legal system based not on evidence, but on who had the toughest skin or access to the best medieval burn cream. Flawlessly, terrifyingly, and hilariously dumb. 7. Vikings are often praised for being cleaner than other Europeans because they bathed once a week on Lagardaggur, or washing day. And yes, that's better than never. But let's paint a more accurate picture. Imagine the communal wooden tub after half the village, caked in a week of mud, sweat, and farm animal filth, has already taken a dip. By the time you get in, you're not bathing in water. You're steeping in a lukewarm brown soup of communal filth, floating particulates, and everyone else's diluted grime. So while being cleaner is technically true, boasting about it when you're the last one in is a spectacularly dumb flex. You're just marinating in everyone else's dirt. 8. Vikings were surprisingly vain, especially about achieving that perfect Scandi blonde hair. Their method, however, was monumentally dumb. They used a brutally harsh soap made with lye, a highly caustic chemical. Yes, the same stuff used today as industrial-strength drain cleaner and, historically, to help dispose of bodies. They would slather this corrosive gunk all over their hair and beards to bleach it. The result was often chemical burns, perpetually irritated scalps and hair with the brittle, lifeless texture of ancient straw. The sheer, eye-watering discomfort, all to look fashionable. Beauty might be pain, but this was just painful, smelly, and proof that they looked less like golden gods and more like startled scarecrows with a nasty scalp condition. 9. The Vikings discovered North America, which they called Vinland, about 500 years before Columbus got his first sailing lesson. Pretty impressive, right? What's monumentally dumb is how they managed to get themselves kicked out. One gloriously weird theory suggests the conflict wasn't about land or resources, but about dairy. The Vikings, who loved their milk and cheese, tried to trade it with the local Native American population, who were almost entirely lactose intolerant. The resulting explosive intestinal distress was apparently mistaken by the Vikings for some kind of magical attack or aggressive war cry. This colossal misunderstanding escalated into conflict, and the Vikings eventually packed up. Imagine abandoning a whole continent because you caused a diplomatic incident with cheese and had zero understanding of basic human digestion. 10. Vikings were shrewd traders, which is a polite way of saying they were occasionally brilliant scam artists. Case in point, the Great Unicorn Horn Swindle. Medieval Europeans were obsessed with unicorns, believing their horns could purify water, cure disease, and probably even file your taxes. The Vikings, ever the opportunists, noticed that the long spiraled tusk of the narwhal looked exactly like people imagined a unicorn horn would. So they hunted these Arctic whales, snapped off their tusks, and sold them to gullible nobles for a fortune, claiming they were 100% genuine magical unicorn parts. It was a dumb obsession on the buyer's part, but a stroke of shrewdly evil genius from the Vikings who made a killing off a fairy tale. 11. A high-status Viking funeral was less of a solemn affair and more of an extravaganza of dumb, wasteful theater. We're not just talking about burying a chieftain in a perfectly good, seaworthy longship that they had to drag miles inland, which is already insane. They would then cram this ship grave with an absurd amount of good stuff: his best weapons, tools, expensive silks, gold jewelry, and slaughtered prize animals. Sometimes, tragically, they even included sacrificed humans to serve him in the afterlife. From a practical standpoint of managing resources for the living community, this was just monumentally dumb. Sorry you're starving, Sven, but we had to bury this perfectly good sword in a pile of gold with the dead guy. 12. Raiding was the Vikings' most famous hobby, and for a while it was a great way to get rich quick. But as a long-term economic strategy, it was brilliantly dumb and completely unsustainable. Sure, pillaging monasteries is fun and profitable in the short term, but constantly sailing around, burning villages, and generally making everyone's life miserable has a predictable outcome. Eventually, everyone else gets tired of it, teams up, builds better defenses, raises professional armies, and dedicates their entire foreign policy to wiping your annoying, pillaging culture off the map. It was a spectacular failure in basic public relations and long-term planning, proving that being the neighborhood bully is only a good strategy until the entire neighborhood decides to fight back at once. 13. We picture Viking explorers as master navigators, but sometimes they discovered entire countries just by being spectacularly bad at sailing in a straight line. Take Iceland. Early Norse settlers probably weren't aiming for a giant volcanic island in the middle of nowhere. Nope, they were most likely just trying to get from Norway to the much closer Faroe Islands. But due to a storm, or perhaps just catastrophically poor navigation, they overshot their target by hundreds of miles and stumbled upon Iceland by complete accident. Imagine the conversation. Land ho! Wait, this doesn't look like the Faroes. This place is huge. Oh well, I guess we live here now. It was nation-building through sheer dumb luck. 14. The Berserkers, the legendary warriors who supposedly flew into a trance-like fury, bit their shields, and fought with superhuman strength, feeling no pain. That feeling no pain part was probably true, right up until an axe or a spear proved them very, very wrong. The dumb part wasn't the rage itself, though fighting naked or in just a bearskin after chugging a questionable herbal brew is a bad start. The truly dumb part was the genuine belief in their own invincibility. Sure, you might scare your enemies for a few minutes, but sharp metal has a consistent track record of winning against howling and shirtlessness. It was less a battle tactic and more a spectacularly dumb way to ignore basic self-preservation. 15. Forget credit cards. Viking economics often involved a hammer and chisel. Instead of standardized coins, they often used hack silver. This is exactly what it sounds like. If you wanted to buy something, you'd take a piece of silver jewelry, like an arm ring or a brooch, and literally hack off a chunk with an axe. This piece would then be weighed to determine its value. Imagine going to the grocery store and paying by brutally chopping a corner off your family's heirloom silverware right there at the checkout. It was an incredibly inefficient and destructive system that ruined beautiful craftsmanship for the sake of buying some bread. That'll be 2 grams, sir. Don't worry, I'll make a clean cut on that lovely bracelet. 16. Let's crush the single dumbest Viking myth of all, the horned helmets. There is exactly 0 archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horns on their battle helmets. 0. The entire look was basically invented in the 19th century for an opera. Just think about how impractical it would be. You'd be a walking target. Your horns would get snagged on tree branches, doorways, or worse, another Viking's horns, leaving you comically stuck together in the middle of a battle. A sword swing to the side of the head would have massive leverage to snap your neck. It's a monumentally stupid design for combat. The only thing dumber than actually wearing a horned helmet into a fight is believing they ever did. 17. The Vikings were resourceful, but their ingenuity often bordered on the hilariously dumb. Take their version of ice skates. Forget sleek steel blades, they strapped polished animal bones, usually from a horse or cow, to the bottom of their boots. Now try to picture that. There are no sharp edges for control, and your only methods of propulsion are flailing your arms wildly or maybe pushing yourself along with a spear. Imagine a fearsome warrior, known for conquering the seas, skittering across a frozen lake with all the grace of a newborn deer on a greased floor. Getting anywhere was secondary to just not breaking your neck. It's a prime example of Viking innovation that was probably more chaotic and dumb than it was practical. 18. Long before rap battles, Vikings had flyting, which was a public poetry slam of increasingly creative and obscene insults. And these weren't just quick jabs. Oh no, participants would spend hours, sometimes days, crafting elaborate, rhyming verses designed to utterly humiliate their opponent. The subjects? Everything from their lack of bravery and questionable parentage to their ugly face or comically undersized battle axe. It was a spectator sport with crowds gathering to watch these poetic takedowns. It's a gloriously dumb dedication of serious brainpower just to call someone a son of a cheese-eating goat herder in perfect alliterative verse. an art form dedicated to being a world-class jerk. 19. Viking nicknames were an art form, ranging from the epic to the brutally honest and downright dumb. For every Eric Bloodaxe or Ragnar Hairy Breeches, you had historical figures stuck with hilariously literal or bizarre titles. We have records of real people named Kettle Flatnose, Olaf the Peacock for his flashy clothes, and the unfortunate Eystein Foulfart. The sagas also mention gems like Ulf the Ugly, Thorir Houndhead, and the much-debated Kolbein Butterpenis. It seems some Viking clans had a cruelly literal sense of humor, sticking people with these gloriously dumb and unflattering names for life. Imagine introducing yourself at a feast as Thorir Houndhead. Just brilliant. 20. You'd think gods would be role models, but the Norse pantheon was a dysfunctional family of divine jerks. Odin, the Allfather, was a notorious schemer and oathbreaker. Loki was the god of mischief, which is just a polite way of saying he was a cosmic-level troll who endangered everyone for a laugh. Thor, while a great warrior, had a terrible temper and wasn't always the sharpest tool in the shed. These gods were constantly bickering, tricking each other, and starting divine brawls over petty insults. Worshipping such a vain, unreliable, and often outright malicious group of deities is a fundamentally dumb choice. They were less divine beings, and more a cosmic reality TV showcast. 21. Game night in the Viking Age could be a high-stakes, life-threatening affair. Vikings loved board games like Hnefatafl, a strategic game similar to chess. But with fragile egos and copious amounts of ale involved, these matches weren't always friendly. Disputes over rules or a particularly smug victory could escalate from arguments straight to bloody violence. The sagas contain accounts of games ending with one player bearing an axe in the other's skull over a lost match. Talk about being a sore loser. It's a level of competitive rage so extreme it's just plain dumb. Your PlayStation controller is safe by comparison. 22. Long before Kilroy was here, Vikings were the original masters of arrogant, historical graffiti. These explorers had a habit of carving runic messages, and sometimes just their names, into some of the most famous and sacred sites of the ancient world. Viking graffiti has been found on a lion statue from ancient Athens, inside the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and even carved over older works on rune stones in Scandinavia. Halfdan was here, one famous inscription reads. It was the ancient equivalent of scratching your initials into a priceless monument, proving that the dumb tourist impulse for petty vandalism is a truly timeless human trait. 23. Keeping up with the neighbors was a serious and seriously dumb business in the Viking Age, especially when it came to funerals. There was intense social pressure to throw the most lavish, over-the-top funeral feast and grave goods display for your deceased chief. This wasn't just about mourning, it was about showing off your wealth, even if it meant bankrupting your family for generations. Sure, we'll be eating gruel for the next 50 years, but look at the incredibly expensive imported sword we buried with Grandpa. Take that, Bjorn's family. It was a form of competitive grieving that was all about status, making it one-upmanship from beyond the grave, and a profoundly dumb economic decision. 24. Eric the Red has to be the author of the oldest and dumbest real estate scam in history. After being exiled from Iceland for killing a few people, Eric sailed west and discovered a massive island that was about 80% ice. What does this marketing genius call it to attract settlers? Not Iceland 2.0. He calls it Greenland. He correctly figured that a more appealing name would trick people into following him to this frozen wasteland. And it worked. People packed up, dreaming of lush pastures, only to find ice, rocks, and a brutally short growing season. The audacity is almost admirable, but for the poor suckers who fell for it, it was a profoundly dumb and very chilly bait-and-switch. 25. For our grand finale of Viking dumbness, let's discuss their legal approach to accidental arson, by cat. According to the old Icelandic law code, if your cat started a fire that burned down someone else's property, you, the owner, could be held liable. Picturing a cat successfully committing arson is already a hilarious mental image. Was Fluffy playing with embers? Did Mittens knock over a candle in a fit of feline rage? The laws even detailed how to determine the cat's culpability. Imagine a solemn Viking court, with bearded men debating whether a small, furry creature had malicious intent. The fact that cat-induced arson was a specific enough problem to be written into law is wonderfully, spectacularly dumb. What a way to lose your farm. 26. If you really hated someone in the Viking Age, you erected a nithing pole. This was one of the most bizarre and theatrically dumb curses imaginable. You'd take a long pole, stick a freshly severed horse's head on top with its mouth propped open, carve nasty insults into the wood, and then point the whole horrifying contraption at your enemy's house. The goal was to invoke the wrath of the land spirits and bring ruin and misery upon your foe. It was a spectacularly dumb, deeply superstitious, and incredibly metal way to tell your neighbor exactly what you thought of them. Forget a strongly worded letter. Vikings preferred horsehead on a stick hate mail. 27. Vikings were resourceful, but this takes you to a whole new level. They used stale, fermented urine for a surprising number of household tasks. The ammonia that develops in aged pea was a versatile chemical. It was used to help start fires when mixed with a certain fungus, to tan leather and make it softer, and even to bleach textiles to get a lighter shade. Imagine the designated pea bucket in the corner of the longhouse. Honey, is the pea pot full yet? I need to bleach the chieftain's favorite tunic. It was gross, surprisingly effective, and a profoundly dumb-sounding multi-purpose cleaner that proves the Viking Age had a very distinct aroma. 28. Viking longhouses sometimes featured a weird and dumb architectural quirk driven by superstition, the corpse door. This was a special door, often in an awkward spot, that was kept sealed and was only used to carry out the dead. The corpse would be removed feet first so it couldn't see where it was going, and then the door would be immediately sealed again. The reason for all this fuss? To dumbly confuse the deceased's ghost, preventing it from finding its way back inside to haunt the living. Imagine building a whole separate ghost-baffling exit because you thought your Uncle Sven's spirit had the navigational skills of a hamster in a maze. 29. Vikings had a healthy respect for the dead that often veered into an over-the-top fear of the Draugr. Basically, Viking zombies with super strength and a terrible attitude. These weren't slow, shuffling monsters. Draugr were bloated, reanimated corpses that could crush men and cause mayhem. So, what dumb precautions did they take? They'd bury bodies with sickles, stake them to the ground, or place a comically large rock on their chest, all to keep them from rising. It was a level of undead paranoia that led to some very labor-intensive funeral practices, all because they were terrified of Uncle Olaf coming back for one last, very destructive rampage. 30. Let's tackle a big one. The very word Viking. We think of the Vikings as a unified nation of axe-wielding raiders. That's just dumb. Viking wasn't a nationality. It was more like a job description or a violent summer hobby. Many Scandinavians were just farmers or traders. Then, some of them would decide, farming is dull, let's go Viking. This basically meant gone raiding, be back for harvest. Picturing every Norseman as a full-time professional pillager is like assuming everyone from Texas is a cowboy. It was a seasonal activity for some, not a full-time identity for all, making our modern monolithic view of them hilariously dumb. 31. The Viking system of governance, the Thing, was surprisingly democratic, but also a recipe for glorious, noisy chaos. Imagine trying to pass laws by having thousands of well-armed, highly opinionated Vikings gather in an open field. They'd shout their views, argue loudly, and then vote by clashing their swords and axes against their shields. The louder the clang, the more support for the proposal. It was probably deafening, looked completely bonkers, and a heated debate could easily turn into a massive brawl. It's a hilariously dumb-looking legislative process that combined politics with a heavy metal concert. 32. Viking superstitions could be exceptionally dumb. For example, there was a widespread fear that unattractive or deformed people could literally curse you with a single nasty glance. The evil eye was a big deal, and people might actively avoid looking at someone they considered ugly, fearing they could cause sickness or misfortune just by looking at them sideways. Imagine the social awkwardness. Don't look at Thorgil the Lopsided, lads. He might curdle the milk with his unfortunate aura. It's a hilariously dumb level of paranoia, blaming innocent people for random bad luck based purely on their appearance. So, their legendary reputation was built on a foundation of terrible ideas and questionable hygiene. But we know this list of 32 is just scratching the surface. The challenge is now on you. What is the single dumbest, most unbelievable Viking fact that we failed to uncover? Expose our blind spots in the comments. If you enjoy history that makes you feel smarter by comparison, smash the like button and subscribe.